Right. So I figure what we'll do is I'm just going to kind of walk you through what Copado does, all the different functions and features. We've got some really neat things coming out. We've got our new release for summer 21 coming out in June. And I'll kind of walk through some of the really neat features that we're actually adding into the platform, and also some of the things that we're adding on to make it even more powerful, because we're actually opening up to MuleSoft development, Heroku development, those kinds of things as well, and allowing you to actually leverage Salesforce to do those things. So first things first, Copado is a fully native Salesforce app. So this means that developers, admins, release managers, whoever it is that's actually interfacing with Copado is doing it from within the Salesforce UI. This means that the team who's using it doesn't have to learn another tool. They simply have to learn a new process. Now, the first tab that I always like to begin with is our pipeline manager, because this is where you have the ability to design and customize the flow of environments that you actually deploy your changes through all the way up into production. So in this example that I have here on my screen, we have a number of dev boxes over here on the far left where all of our changes are originating. Now, we do follow many of the best practices that have been found across DevOps research. And one of the very most specific ones is that every developer should be working in their own sandbox. This just reduces the amount of overlap, reduces the amount of friction as you have multiple developers who are working in the same sandbox. So once we've created all of our changes, they've originated in our lowest environment. They're then merged and deployed up into our integration environment, and then into UAT, and then into our production environment. Now, as we're going to see throughout this demo, Copado does so much more than just providing you with this quicker and easier way to deploy changes through Sandbox. We're more than just a deployment tool. Additionally, you're going to have tools at your disposal for testing changes so that you have this full assurance that they're only of the highest quality before they ever move anywhere within your pipeline. We're also going to give you conflict detection and resolution from within the Salesforce UI. And Copado automates all of the Git operations behind the scenes. So actions that are typically performed manually and require a high level of technical knowledge, such as creating feature branches, committing the changes, merging the branches to the right place at the right time, all of that is going to be taken care of by Copado. All while the team members are just utilizing this point and click interface here within Salesforce. Now, last thing, all of the actions that your development and release teams engage in are logged right here within Salesforce, meaning that all of those DevOps metrics that all of your executives want to know and that you possibly want to know will be pumped directly into the reports and dashboards that are native to Salesforce. Now, as we look further into our pipeline, you may be wondering what these numbers and arrows next to each of my orgs represent. So this number 8 above the forward arrow here indicates that we have 8 unique containers of changes that are ready to be deployed up to integration environment from our Dev 1 environment. And this backwards 4 actually tells me that I'm behind in some of the latest changes. So I actually have the ability to pull in those changes through a back deployment into my lower environment. So this screen really serves as somewhat of my air traffic control center over my entire Salesforce DevOps practice. Now, one thing that I do want to bring your attention to is with Copado, we can manage multiple streams of work, multiple projects, multiple pipelines from within our Salesforce ecosystem here. And in our single production instance, we can manage all of the work that's going on within any of our pipelines. Not only that, we can also narrow down what we're looking at, just like anywhere else in Salesforce, to actually narrow down and look at specifically, maybe we're looking at a specific developer's work, or maybe we're looking at, where all of our user stories are for a specific release. Now, we'll come back to this page a little bit later, but a large part of using Copado is working within these metadata containers. So filling them up, testing them, and ultimately deploying them. And so let's actually dive into what those containers look like. Now, this is what our metadata container looks like. We've labeled this object the user story because many of our clients are actually using ALM applications like Jira or Rally or Azure DevOps to groom the backlog of user stories that their teams are working on. And so we've actually built out a bi-directional integration with all of those ALM applications so that we can easily pull those user stories into Copado, update them, and actually sync that up to that ALM application. So you can work either in Salesforce or in your ALM application and keep everything up to date as you're working on it. Now, as you can see, Copado is, of course, going to hold all of those same fields here. And all of this is done through field mappings in our integration. It's really, really straightforward and really simple. But you can see, for example, we have our sprint. We have the release that we're working on. We have team information. We even have a link out to what this story looks like out in Jira. But below that, we also have the requirements for this user story. But beyond the convenience of just listing requirements and using Copado as a Salesforce-based ALM, Copado's primary function is actually to use the user story as our metadata container that our changes are put into and then deployed up through our pipeline. I like to call it our bucket full of changes, because as I make changes to the items that would suffice the requirements for this user story, I'm actually placing them into version control and into Salesforce as the ones that I want to include for this user story. So as a developer, let's actually get into what it looks like as a developer to use Copado. I would come in here and I'm starting out with my user story, and I would fill out this environment field with where I'm going to be making my changes. So in this case, I'm working in my Dev1 environment. And Copado actually fills in the remainder of the flow above, informing me and enforcing that I first deploy into integration, and then into UAT, and ultimately into production. So if I was supposed to be creating some kind of account description automation, as this story says, then I can actually log into Dev1, and I can use Apex or workflows or whatever it is that I need to build that functionality. But then I need to link those changes to this user story. And I can do that in a really simple way. And we actually utilize our Salesforce UI here by clicking commit changes in the top right, which pops open this metadata grid for me. And this metadata grid is all of the pieces of metadata from my Dev1 sandbox, where I stated that, hey, I'm going to be making my changes in this environment. And now I have the ability to use the tools on this page, such as being able to sort or filter or search, in order to quickly and easily locate my changes. Now, one of the most common things that we've seen our customers do, and this is pre this latest version of Copado, is they would first sort by this last modified by date, so that all of their latest changes from today or yesterday or this week float to the very top. And then, maybe they still have quite a few components. They've done a lot of work on a lot of different user stories. Well, let's actually filter down to a specific type of metadata that we're looking for. And so you can see my list went from 9,000 components to 1,000. Well, that's still quite a few to parse through, and I don't know where my change sits within this list. So let me just go ahead and type it in and really shorten this list down to 34 components. And now it's quite simple for me to just select my changes. But not only that, with the latest release that Copado is actually releasing here in June, we're actually going to allow you to be able to auto-select your changes. So what Copado is going to do is actually going to track a diff between these different components and auto-select the ones that have been done since today. So their change last modified by date says today, or it says yesterday or today, or it says a date that's after. And so what that allows us to do is very quickly and easily locate all of the different pieces that actually satisfy the requirements for this user story. And so once I've actually selected those pieces of metadata and they're represented here within my list, then all I have to do is click on commit changes in the top right. And this actually kicks me back over to the user story again. But there are a number of things that Copado does in the background that makes your life so much easier. So for example, if this was the first time I was committing to this user story, then Copado is going to create a brand new feature branch out in Git for me. And then it's going to grab the delta changes from the pieces of metadata that I selected from the grid and commit those to the feature branch. Not only that, it's then going to take all of those actions that it just performed for you and write them back against the user story record here in Salesforce. So you have this full visibility, transparency, and reportability of who's doing what, when are they doing it, and why. So what's the business case for the changes that they're introducing into our dev environments? And so when I click on commit changes, it pops me back to my user story record. And now I can click on this commit subtab. And it's actually going to give me a list of all of the commits that I've actually done against this user story. And I can actually click into here and it takes me out to Git to show me exactly what this commit looks like out in Git itself. And as I do this multiple times, it's going to continue to write every single one of those commits to this user story for me. But not only that, it's also going to give me a full list of all of the pieces of metadata that actually make up my Git feature branch in the background. So I have this running list. So in essence, what we're providing with our user story is a point and click interface to take your changes, whether they're code changes or configuration. I know I don't have to tell you how painful it is to migrate profile or permission set changes with a change set or something like that. It's the bane of everyone's existence. But now we're going to give you this ability to do that and put it into version control from just within this Salesforce UI. So now that we've filled up our container, we've put everything in Git, we've gotten it written to our user story. Before it's ever deployed up into the integration environment or anywhere else, we may be required to run some tests because we want to make sure that our quality is high. We want to make sure we have enough coverage for all of our Apex classes, all of those different things. And we trigger all of those things, or they can be triggered from our user story record here. So if I wanted to run, for example, a validation deployment, just to make sure that this deployment is going to build correctly, I can click validate changes. If I needed to open up a PR for a more formal code review process, I can click open pull request here on the user story record. But not only that, I can also click in here and manage my Apex tests. I can run static code analysis. I can even run the Copado Compliance Hub to run a compliance scan on this user story record and the components that are represented in it, so that I can maintain that my quality is at the highest level or is at the level that is required by my organization. But not only that, once we've run those tests, we've run static code analysis, we've done all of the things that we needed to do, how do we view those results? Well, that's where our quality gate subtab on the user story record comes in handy. And again, this is really important because everything that's written to our user story is infinitely reportable in our reports and dashboards here within Salesforce. So if I wanted to come in here and see the latest results from my static code analysis run, I could actually click into this record and see exactly what my violations were and where they sat. If I wanted to see if a pull request had been opened and approved as part of my formal code review process, I could click into here and see exactly who did the approval and when was it done, and all of the different parts and pieces that I need to make sure that it's done correctly. But not only that, anything that you want to run, whether it's a third-party tool that's writing or is running your test and then writing those results back, we can actually map those to our Quality Gates Results tab here on the user story record. So all of those results are reportable directly to this user story record. Now, the reason that we call these quality gates is really important. And we did that because they can actually be used to actively prevent user stories from being deployed upstream until all of the right tests have been run and the custom quality threshold that you actually can institute on a user story by user story basis has been met. Does that make sense to everybody? I want to take a brief break here and allow anyone to ask any specific questions, but otherwise I'll continue on.
Yeah, hi Tyler. This is Anil here again. So first of all, I would say pretty convincing tool. It really looks like it can make our job pretty easy. Yeah. So I have a question. So when you told about it runs the test right for you, does it run the test at each stage? Like when you are moving from, let's say, dev to integration, and then again from integration to UAT, does it run the test every time?
That is entirely up to your organization and something that's fully configurable within Copado. So we can set it up on an environment basis where every time something moves out of an environment, it must first pass the quality gate. Or we can set it up on the user story and require that each user story has to pass that same test at each level of the deployment.
Okay, I think you answered my question. My question was actually that, can we configure that? So yeah. And I have one other question. So in the starting of the presentation, you mentioned this is recommended that each developer is developing out of their own sandbox. But if, let's say, a scenario wherein 5 developers are developing out of single sandbox, does Copado still take care of that?
Yeah, it sure can. All that's going to happen is you're going to miss out on some of the you're going to run into a little bit of friction with your team because you might be walking over each other and having to work on some extreme collaboration is what we like to call it. Working all in the same environment, you might want to work on the same piece of code. It makes it very difficult because everyone's working in the same environment. With a multi sandbox strategy, you have the ability for each person to actually be able to work on the exact same piece of code at the same time. And what Copado actually does is it enables that collaboration to happen between team members.
Okay.
And that's actually the very next thing I was going to talk through is how do we help teams like that who want to move to a complex sandbox strategy to actually move into that. Well, and one of the ways that we do that is through our overlap awareness. Now, something you may or may not have noticed whenever I was looking at my commit subtab is that on our running list of everything that's in our feature branch, we're also giving you a status. And the status is related to if this component actually exists in other places within your pipeline. So for example, if we look at our first component here, it's actually our account trigger helper. You can see that we have a status next to it of potential conflict. So it's telling us, hey, this piece of metadata might have a possible conflict with someone else's work that sits somewhere within our pipeline that's not production. And so what I have the ability to do is from my user story record overlap awareness tab, I can actually click into this component and see exactly where those other user stories are sitting within my pipeline. But not only that, I'm given a very quick link to be able to either open a pull request with them and compare work and start doing collaboration that way. Or I can actually click into here and see who's working on it and then get with them to figure out what kind of accommodations that we'd like to give. So we're going to get into actual merge conflicts in just a second and how we actually resolve them from within Copado shortly. But this is what we do in terms of preventative maintenance on all of your different organizations and helping your team to actually reduce friction before it ever even comes up in the form of merge conflicts or something like that. So we filled up our user story container. We've run quality gates. So we know our code is extremely high. We know it's meeting all of our requirements. Well, then the next piece would be deploying up through the pipeline. We're actually deploying our user story object. So I'm actually back here in my pipeline manager where we started. So if we take a closer look at our Dev1 environment here, we can see that we have our 8 unique user stories that are available to be deployed up into integration. So my developers have finished 8 user stories. They're ready to be deployed. And now I can just click on this number 8 here on my pipeline manager. And I'm going to be presented with a list of all of the user stories that my developers have said, hey, this work is done. And I now have the ability from this screen to actually cherry pick exactly which stories I want to include as part of each and every one of my deployments. And I can actually do this decoupling features, cherry picking which stories I want to include at every single level, even moving from a UAT into a production. So we give you this huge level of granular control over what exactly is in each of your deployments, what version of each user story is in every single one of your deployments. Now, after I've selected what I wanted to be deployed, I can actually click on this blue promote and deploy button in the top right, and Copado takes care of all of the changes that are associated with those user stories. So it's going to create the package.xml for you, and then it's going to deploy it up to the integration sandbox. But not only that, simultaneously in the background, Copado performs all of the right Git operations and merges so that the environment's Git branches also remain in sync. So everything remains in sync no matter what, because Copado takes care of the Git piece. Now, at this point is where we see a lot of companies do a handoff to a release manager. So let's assume that's the case. We've allowed our developers to go ahead and deploy all of their stories up into integration. We're also doing the same thing for admins, because what is Copado doing but standardizing the process across roles? Well, as those stories meet in integration, we're going to be seeing this number 6 increment up and up. And so what we're given is the ability to actually click into this 6 and see a screen that's identical to what we just saw out of Dev 1 to cherry pick each of our stories and how we want to build our next deployment up into UAT and what we actually want to leave behind. But what happens if we run into a merge conflict when we're trying to deploy between environments? I know if anyone has run into a merge conflict before, which I probably don't even need to say that because I think we've probably all run into them before and hate them for what they are. But if that's the case, if Copado runs into a merge conflict, we're actually going to put the deployment on hold. We're going to say, hey, hold on. But not only that, it's going to bring you to a screen within Salesforce that looks exactly like this. And it's going to give you a list of all of the components that actually make and subsist this merge conflict. So if we have multiple components that are creating this conflict, it's going to show that to us here and give us a very convenient UI for being able to solve that problem in Salesforce. So we reduce the amount of different places we have to go to fix a problem. And so we can actually click on resolve manually here on the right, and we're going to be shown this screen. And so over here on the right-hand side, this is our feature branch. These are the changes that I have created and introduced into version control. This is what I'm trying to push up. And over here on the left is my resolution branch, which is just a copy of my next org up that's been created that we can then create our resolution out of. And so from here, we like to call this our working canvas. On my working canvas, I can actually type in exactly what I want my resolution to be. But even better than that, I can actually pull in the changes from my feature branch that I want included as part of my resolution.
Hi, Tyler. Sorry to interrupt, but looks like your screen might have frozen. We are still at Pipeline Manager.
You're still at Pipeline Manager. Is everyone else seeing that as well?
I see resolution.
Okay, then probably then it just, okay, sorry. Yeah, it might have been frozen for me. Yeah, I can just refresh it.
Okay.
Yeah. You never know with these things, right? If it's just you or if it's the other person. So, yeah.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much for saying something, Danielle. I want to make sure that you're getting to see what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I just refreshed and I can see it now. Yeah, sorry about
that. Perfect. Not to worry at all. So one of the great things about this UI is we're going to give you this 2-panel view, but you'll notice here in the top right, we also have a 3-panel view. And we also have a 1-panel view. It really comes down to what's your flavor. How do you like to resolve your conflicts? A lot of times this is typically something you have to go out into your Git provider and actually work with their interface. But instead, we're going to give it to you here within Salesforce. And so for our 3-panel view, now we can see that here's our feature branch, the changes that we're trying to introduce. Here's our working canvas here in the middle. And then here's the static version of our promotion branch. So here's what the next environment looks like, so that as we're actually building our resolution, we can see how we're changing it as we're moving through. And of course, this is just what it looks like for code. But what about things for admins where they're actually having to parse through XML? They're working with these thousands of lines of code. Well, Copado's actually done something really neat. This is an example of a page layout. So you can imagine how helpful it is for admins specifically to be able to easily resolve conflicts without necessarily having to go in and edit an XML file manually. Furthermore, we're also going to give you a different view of this file in YAML. So instead of having to parse those XML tags, which can make it, a lot more difficult to actually see true differences between files, we're going to make it a lot simpler by removing those tags and just giving you these chunks of code so you know exactly what the meat is of what changes that I'm actually trying to introduce into my deployment. And you can see it's as simple as clicking these black arrows to pull in the changes that I want to introduce as part of my deployment. All right, so we've covered what it's like when we deploy upstream, but as I had briefly alluded to in the very beginning, you do have the ability to keep all of your orgs in sync with Copado using back deployments. So we're going to keep track as user stories move through your pipeline of the exact number of user stories that each one of your orgs is behind on. And we're also going to increment this backwards arrow to alert you that an org is behind on some of those changes that were introduced by maybe one of your coworkers or some other members of your team, so that we can actually keep track of exactly how far behind a specific org is. So if we're looking at Dev 1 here, because we know that our Dev 2 through 4 in our velocity sandbox they're not doing so great. They're falling a little behind. Maybe they're on vacation. They've missed out on the last release. We need an easy way to get them up to speed when they come back. or just to get them up to speed because they're falling behind and not doing what they're supposed to. Well, if that's the case, we're actually going to give you a really simple way of doing that. You just click on this number 4 or the number of stories that the org is behind on, and we're going to give you a screen that's absolutely identical to what we looked at for forward deployments. And so from here, you can decouple or include all the features that are you're behind on, and then go ahead and click back, promote, and deploy. And this is going to eliminate the need for you to refresh sandboxes, which is a hugely time-consuming process. Not to mention all of the different post-refresh steps that I know everyone loves to go through just to keep your data up to date or be able to do testing or anything else that you need to be doing. Now, I know you're thinking right now, what happens if we run into a merge conflict when we back deploy? What happens with that user story? Well, if that's the case, we're going to stop the deployment. We're going to put it on hold, and we're going to give you the exact same screen we gave you for forward deployments to take care of that resolution. So we're going to give you that exact same in Salesforce UI to resolve your conflicts. Now, the last thing that I want to mention as we're sitting here in our pipeline is everything that I've shown you so far is fully manual, but we can automate almost all of it. So forward deployments, back deployments, testing, we can take care of all of that. And we do that just by configuring our pipeline here. So as the team grows, as the complexity of your needs grow, Copado is going to scale with you and allow you to automate so many of the things that you're doing. Now, before I open it up for my last round of questions, I want to give you a look at that, all of that reporting. So we've talked about how we write everything to the user story record. And we talk about the value of that is that we can then report on it. So because Copado is built on Salesforce and we live in Salesforce, all of the actions that take place, commits, deploys, approvals, tests, etc., they're all logged in our custom objects and fields that are then pumped directly into Salesforce reports and dashboards. So if I'm looking for some kind of information on something like the sprint that we're in the middle of, I can see a snapshot of the progress of that sprint right here. Or if I wanted to see a breakdown of how my user stories are sitting and what's their status. Let's say I want to see the progress of each of my developers for this specific sprint. Well, I can see that here too. But maybe I'm looking from more of the architectural role, seeing how are things being moved? What are my developers making changes on? Well, I can actually come into my change management dashboard and see, how many user stories are sitting in each environment, or how many user stories are being done on each project, so that I can reapportion work. I can see how my teams are actually working on something. If I wanted to see how many times a specific type of metadata is being included in my deployments, I can see that here. If I want to see how many times we're actually making profile changes, because that feels like something we probably shouldn't do very often, well, maybe I can come in here and see, and work with my developers on why are we making so many changes? Do we need to do a better job planning? But not only that, we can then come down and see how many promotions are we doing by environment and what's the status of each and every one of those promotions. Now, these are just some of the out-of-the-box dashboards, but because this is Salesforce, and we all know the power of Salesforce for reporting, you're actually free to take all of these data points and track them and cross-report them against all of your company's dashboards, your company's metrics, to get the ideal dashboards that your company needs in order to fully understand what's happening with your company's DevOps activities. So that's what I've got for a demo. What questions do you have? What can I answer? How can I help you to understand all of the wonderful power of Copado?
I have a question, Tyler, about so is it a managed package that you install?
It is, yes. We're
okay.
a managed package. We're just like any other app in the App Exchange.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
Thank you for the presentation. But how can I configure my own Git repos with Copado, right? Because we're using more of a scratch setup. So, we'll have a couple hundred repos kind of running essentially. So is there any limitations with that or concerns that you have with that type of number?
So a lot of times whenever we work with people who are working specifically with DX, we try and understand what's the reasoning for, why do you want to work with, scratch orgs and those kinds of things? What's the specific use case for them or the value for them in your development process? Obviously, if that's the way you like to work, then by all means, you can add that into a pipeline. We will require, though, that you have a single main repository that Copado will write changes into. And in that way, we actually utilize a branching strategy within that single repo, and it would become essentially your master repo. And from there, you could then do PRs and things in and out of that for your Scratch orgs, or you would just deploy your changes from your Copado pipeline into your master repository.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Another question. So as far as the initial implementation of Copado, like, do you have to engage with like your professional services to build it out to your specifications, or are there like point and click configurations that, you know, admins / developers could do themselves?
So we do have some professional services teams that we work with in order to implement. Implementation typically only takes about 2 weeks for the actual implementation of the tool. However, our team does about 6 weeks of training with you to go ahead and get the team fully up to date on how do we use Copado, what's the best practices. We do a really heavy emphasis on making sure that your process is optimized as best as possible to start out so that you have as much success as possible. But to answer your question more specifically, we will typically engage with a professional services partner in order to get it implemented in your org. But setup is not incredibly difficult. It's a lot of just click and point and click within Salesforce.
Okay, so if you wanted to, like, say, go in and change your approvals later or something, you could do that yourself. You wouldn't. Okay.
100%. So
okay.
once we get you up to date and running on it, you're welcome to go in and edit approvals and create your own approval flows and Salesforce flows, and whatever you want to do within Copado, you can fully do in terms of automation. It really just comes down to your imagination, what you want to do.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. What else can I answer? Is there anything I can do? I know we've got one last thing that I want to talk about, which is our academy, which I believe we gave you guys a coupon code. Melissa, you may talk about it later. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm spilling the beans a little bit. I apologize.
I mean, that. Yes, no, that's fine. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I don't want to steal the thunder. I'd love to answer any questions that anybody has, though, before we move on. But otherwise, I turn it over to you, Melissa.
Okay. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Nadina, actually, although I will share my screen with that slide. And we'll do that.
Sorry, I kind of.
It's all good. Yes, there is a voucher code to get certified. Now, Nadina did most of the work talking with you to set this up. So I'm a little confused. Are you giving us a code for everyone to be able to get a free certification, or what is it exactly?
Yes. So our Copado voucher code will actually allow you to go in and get a certification. Specifically, it's the Copado. If you already have the admin, then you can get developer. But it's whatever the next certification is for you. So, for example, I have the admin certification currently. If I were not a member of Copado and I had just gotten this voucher code, I could then go in and get Copado developer. So it's going to give you for free a $250 voucher for whatever your next certification is within the Copado Academy.
And it's a self-paced learning course, so it's very easy to go through. And then you have a sandbox environment where you can set up your own Copado and play around. And it's very similar to like a trailhead type of environment.
Different website or different web link where we have the training documentation.
Yes. So I just posted the code and the website. So if you go to that website, it's actually a community. And once you log into that community, you'll see the learning track. And then if you haven't done the admin one first, you'll do that one first. It'll be like a trail that you do, and at the end you'll take that certification.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
And then I also posted the learning calendar. So Copado has, sometimes they'll have training days, sometimes they'll have other partner learning. So definitely check that out as well.
And you'll get to spend even more time with me.
Do you do training?
I do some of the training. You'll actually meet several of our sales engineers as they take you through. We do trainings over admin, developer, and consultant tracks.
Nice. Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of people posting about getting Copado certified on Twitter lately. So I've seen it getting traction, at least across my Twitter feed. So yeah, very cool. That is awesome.
Yeah, Tyler, I have one last question. If I'm still.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Okay. So since we see this, another certification called Copado's developer, right? So I have a question on that. So as a client, if I'm, taking this managed package, are we allowed to do customizations on top of it? Are we having access to? Okay.
Yeah, you're fully allowed to customize. Once we get you built out, obviously you can't touch any of the managed components. But if you want to build out your own customizations, you're more than welcome to.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely. We see some really incredible things with our team. We are, very much a Salesforce invested company, and we've tried to model so much of our learning academy and the things that we do after what Salesforce does, because they do it so well. And so you'll find a lot of what we do mirrors very closely to what you would see on a Trailhead or something like that in our academy.
Yeah, it's already looked really promising and wonderful. Congratulations to you guys. Really, really exciting.
Totally agree. Yeah, this is something it'd be great if Salesforce had available itself.
Yeah.
Some of this functionality is stuff that, as someone who has developers, my company develops software that they don't develop in Salesforce, and now we got Salesforce a year ago, and so they're just starting to learn more about Salesforce and having to do things in Salesforce. And they're like, why does it not let you do this? Why do we have, refreshing a developer sandbox, and they have all this tied in, all your integrations tied into that, and you have to, it's just, even the backward compatibility is a very, cool thing to be able to do. So yeah, I love it.
Absolutely. And just so you guys know, in June, we are releasing our, like I've said this, I think about 10 times now, is we have our summer release in June. And we are releasing kind of the multi-cloud piece of Copado, and that we're actually going to allow you to create MuleSoft pipelines, Heroku pipelines, and we're working on Commerce Cloud, I believe, for later this year as another release. So if you are a MuleSoft integrator, you're utilizing MuleSoft to do your development, you can also manage that DevOps platform or that DevOps pipeline from within Copado.
Very nice. Nice. Cool. All right. Sorry. Okay. I'm going to that one. What else do we have? Anyone have any other questions or something they want to bring up that they, want advice from the group about?
I just thought of one.
No.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Anil.
Okay, sorry. So Melissa, I have I would say pretty silly question if you want to answer that. So for our watch party, I got a code or voucher something wherein I can order a T-shirt and other stuff for the watch party. And I'm not sure like if anybody here familiar with that matter, but I'm very poor with by looking at the sizes in the catalog and trying to find my right fit. So if you have any idea like what's the sizes are like, or are they like start with the youngsters and then goes up to elder guys?
Yeah, I saw there was like a slim cut and a straight cut or something option. Yeah, I know. That's always sort of like I can't remember if they had any measurements included.
Yeah,
you did. There is some measurements. You can measure yourself. I'll tell you for myself, I would normally order like a large for a t-shirt, but for the fitted, I'm doing extra large because
Yeah, the fitted is like, I think that's like the ladies cut generally, like,
yes.
Yeah, and yeah, those run super tiny. Like I think the extra
they're
small,
pretty fitted.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like the smaller extra small would fit my 10-year-old. You know, that's how.
Okay, I think I got the idea. You know. So
Yeah.
I'll go with the medium.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, thank you. You know, for taking that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, totally.
You'll get like more information than you asked for from us. When you ask
Yeah, it's always welcome.
Nice.
Yeah, Tyler, I had a question about the pricing. I would assume is based on only users that need to touch basically the managed package.
Yeah, so the way that we typically do it, or at least the way that we like to do pricing, is you have a platform license fee that you will have for each production org. So we have people like, some of our customers like, I won't say names, but we have some customers who have 30 plus orgs, for example. Well, they pay a license fee. And of course, there's discounts as they have more. And as they spend more with us, we're more willing to give discounts. But they have 30 something production orgs and they manage all of them within Copado. So each user that is going to be committing changes into version control, utilizing the user story, utilizing the managed package would need to have a license. And we have two different licenses. We have a Copado user and a Copado admin. And these are totally different than your typical Salesforce user or Salesforce admin licenses. The Copado admin is the only one who's allowed to push into production, as well as manage your Git repository and those kinds of things. And then your Copado user is typically a developer. And they're the ones who are making the changes in lower environments and just committing them into user stories and version control from there. So typically we'll have two admins per account, essentially, where you have at least two admins. So that way, if one of them goes on PTO, you're not out a release manager, essentially.
Yeah, that actually brought up another question. I'd used a previous product where the managed package was actually installed in a third org that was outside of our main orgs, and that's where we actually logged in to do all of the management of the releases. Is it kind of the same thing, or a 30 org thing? I mean, that you'd probably want its own org, but yeah, if you only have one org, you just put it in the one.
Yeah, you would just put it in that one. For some of our customers, for example, our financial services customers, putting a developer who maybe is an offshore resource into their production level instance is scary and they don't want to expose any data. So we have a governance org that stands off to the side. It really entirely depends on preference, but we support any of them. So I know we have we do trials and things with companies all the time where we set up a third party, a third org essentially as a governance org to manage their pipelines. But in general, best practice, we typically will put it in your production org and go from there.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm going to stop sharing my screens. See everybody. Any other questions? Cool. It's hard to tell the amount of time I should wait. I'm not great at that. Yeah, no, this was really interesting. I was glad we got this. This is a cool presentation. I appreciate your time, Tyler. And I think, yeah, I don't think my company is ready for it, but I would definitely love to use this in the future because, yeah, change sets are not the best. And I think that this is, this could be really useful for companies, whether you don't have to be the hugest company that has tons of developers for this to be very useful for you,
I've seen teams of 4 utilize Copado and see massive value because it allowed them to release early and often and reduce the friction for building their deployments. And allowing them to actually implement process, which made it so much easier to bring on new team members. And that's one of the things that I love, is that it's so easy to get up to speed on how do I actually use Copado, because I don't have to learn Git. I just have to learn a new process of, hey, go put it into the user story and then deploy it from there.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. All right. Anybody else, or are we gonna get this going? You gonna log off? Okay. Yeah, so next month is Trailhead DX. Remind everybody about that. That's in, what day? That is June 23rd. So we will see y'all on June 23rd. We have it on our website, on our Success Community site to sign up. You can do it there, and we'll see you then. All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.